One of the things that I think has been fascinating to watch here, and we've mentioned this a couple times, especially over the last couple days, is the performative politics that exist in arguably, not really arguably, objectively, a pretty tumultuous political climate. 11 elected officials were arrested in New York City. Oh no. Oh, how terrible is that? Actually, not really at all. If you look at what is actually happening, the big headlines from the Big Apple were saying, oh my gosh, this is just more fascism. They're arresting people for, okay, well, what for? Well, apparently, those up to 11 officials who were elected in either the city or the state were doing this. Watch this clip, and we will discuss why what they're doing is ridiculous together.
Let us in! 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 Let us in!
That's probably good. We probably recognize what's going on there. They had to make sure all the cameras were set up before they started chanting. What those were protesters going into a building from the, I think this is the ABC affiliate in New York City, saying, well, they're going to protest the conditions at an immigration holding facility in Manhattan, where a federal judge this week extended a court order requiring the government to shape up the treatment of the detainees. A federal judge said something. How new of a story is that nowadays? But basically, a federal judge said, hey, you got to make sure this is a five-star hotel for these illegals. That's what New York City is used to. Put them up in the nicest possible hotel, one that me or you can't afford, but let's give it to the illegals. Well, apparently that standard, that five-star gold standard, was not being met, and therefore, for performative purposes, 11 elected New York officials needed to sit Indian style in the lobby of this ICE facility and chant like they were kindergartners and their teacher was, I don't know, having them have fun between nap time and story time. I'm not entirely sure what they were planning to do specifically, but we've all seen this before, and I think that's the broader purpose here. These people were not actually looking to do anything other than gain media attention. They clearly had all the cameras in that room, and they started chanting their let us in, which, as we've seen so many times, you probably actually can get in if you do it the right way. File a request and go say, hey, can we actually come in this facility? And they'll probably be like, okay, well, yeah, you're an elected official. We can't squeeze you in today, but how's next week? And that's how things go. But if you want to make a political point, again, you sit there crisscross applesauce like a 5-year-old and start chanting fervently, but you got to make sure the cameras are on or else no one will actually care. Now, we don't actually care regardless, but remember, this is all a publicity stunt. Here's the difference with publicity stunts now that mimic what publicity stunts were back in the day. This shouldn't be a shock or surprise to anyone, but the United States, for its benefit, has had protests where people hope to change the hearts and minds of either the populace or the elected officials. That has worked in the past. Specifically, you probably all remember protests around Vietnam. I'm not here to relitigate whether or not the United States should have gotten involved in Vietnam, but I want to bring you some interesting poll numbers on the Vietnam War as it progressed in time and through America's political culture. In 1965, about 64% of Americans were pro going into Vietnam. About, 2/3 of Americans said this is probably in our best interest. Again, I'm not necessarily even saying yes or no. I'm just saying that's what the polling was in 1965. By 1968, only 32% of Americans approved of Johnson's job in Vietnam. Now, there's a lot of other different variables. There's not a lot of different ways to poll that, but the bottom line is 2/3 of America agreed going in, and then in 3 years, 1/3, one out of every 3 Americans said, not really a big fan of how this administration is handling that. That then led to a bunch of Vietnam protests around college campuses. Some got a little bit more violent than others. I would call those riots. But the bottom line is the protesters, in effect, were articulating the way that the public felt. In other words, they were protesting, they were standing up for something, but the broader community of the United States of America thought, yeah, we actually agree with that. That, in effect, obviously took some time, but eventually kind of changed the minds of the politicians. That differs from what's happening today because nobody agrees with these people. One of the biggest reasons, and I don't need to tell you folks, one of the biggest reasons that Donald Trump got elected was because he was saying, hey, I'm going to get all of the illegals out of the country. There was a poll that during the election, I can't think of it off the top of my head, that had like 80 or 90% of Americans saying, no, get every illegal out of the country. That wasn't even accounting for amnesty. That wasn't even accounting for, okay, well, is it a DACA kid or no. All the illegals gone. I would argue to say that that probably wasn't the actual true nature. What it was in that polling was sending a message. This is important to us. We want this. Now, overall, the polling really hasn't changed much. Yes, as power changes, the polling slips down a little bit, but overall, the broad majority of Americans want illegals to get deported from the country, which makes a difference when you see protests like this. It also will probably remind you of the Senator Alex Padilla protest where he effectively tried to rush the stage when Chrissy Noem was giving a speech and, well, got tackled for his troubles. Actually, I don't think he ever got tackled. They just put him on the ground and said, hey, dude, who are you? He said, I'm a U.S. Senator. Okay, well, why are you acting like an animal coming in off the streets? The bottom line here is that all of these performative politics, while protesting does actually make a difference in this country, well, is used primarily to reinforce the ideas that the people already have. In other words, the country is more susceptible to being swayed by protests. The elected officials are more susceptible to being swayed by protests when the populace agrees with what the protesters are doing. Because the United States says, yeah, we probably should have borders. We should have a strong southern border. We probably shouldn't let anybody else in. And we got to get the illegals, especially the criminal illegals, out of the country. Performative politics like the ones that you're seeing in New York City don't work. The idea that a headline saying, well, there was 11 elected officials that were just arrested in New York City doesn't make a difference because everybody can recognize, one, they were not doing the protest in the proper way, and two, we don't agree with these people anyways. If they would have just gone through the process, they probably could have inspected the facilities. But again, that's not actually what they wanted to do. They wanted the sound bites to be on the internet. The fascist federal government, which I don't even think they know what fascist means, was arresting people just for trying to check up on the illegal criminal immigrants that are in this country, again, illegally. That is, of course, not what happened. And I think, hopefully, the entirety of the American people understand that this stuff won't work. It's not going to work, especially because the United States of America has such free speech ideas to where we can express, yeah, we don't want illegals in the country, and you pulling these sorts of stunts isn't going to change hearts and minds because we know what you're doing. It is a publicity stunt, it's an attention grab, and it doesn't work because it's not bolstering the side, generally speaking, of where Americans fall. So, good luck with your arrest. I hope the book is thrown at these folks. You're not you're not being victimized in any way, shape, or form, and that goes for Senator Alex Padilla too, who still is airing. I was watching Thursday Night Football last night, and there was, not to get into California weeds, there was a vote yes on Prop 50. Make sure California takes away the rights of the people to redistrict as they see fit. Again, not to get too in the weeds on that, but there was a commercial of Alex Padilla getting arrested, and I can't imagine anybody was watching that without rolling their eyes going, yeah, dude, if you bum rush a federal official, doesn't matter who you are, especially if you're not identifying yourself as a senator, things are not going to work out in your favor. Performative politics is dumb. It is stupid. I wish we didn't do it. But also, I hope libs continue doing it because it's very fun to mock them for something that won't actually make a difference. I'm very happy to do that and continually do that.